Welcome, low ego action heroes. I'm Debbie Levitt from Delta CX. We are a full service CX and UX consultancy. And this is my Axure 10 Core Skills course. I've been using Axure since February 2011, and I've been teaching it for many, many years. And in fact, I've been one of Axure's recommended trainers since 2014. This course is designed to take you from super Axure newbie or Axure afraid all the way through to confident intermediate. So if you've landed on this one video, there are many, many others. Please check our Axure lessons playlist for a lot more videos about using Axure. The Delta CX YouTube channel has over 500 videos on it as of when I'm recording this in December 2021, and I hope you'll subscribe and join in some of our live streams. I'm live usually 3 or 4 times a week with teaching UX research and design, talking about CX, helping people get into the profession, helping leaders and managers, and of course, don't forget Tuesday, office hours, Ask Me Anything. So subscribe and hang out here. So thanks for being here. Please subscribe and let's jump into that next Axure lesson.
Now that we've learned some of the basics of dynamic panels, let's start practicing with them by building a carousel. Now, hello from the future, where my dynamic panels page already has a bunch of tabs on them. Tabs, of course, is a future lesson, but hello from the future, where I had to re-record my carousels lesson. So here we are. We're going to do carousels completely from scratch, and then we're going to compare it to Axure's default carousel that you can find in their UI Patterns library. So let's take a look at how we would build a carousel from scratch. So first, I'm going to start by dragging out a dynamic panel, and you can make it any size you want. It's totally up to you. We can make it wider, narrower. Very often a carousel is used as a hero image, but these are being used less and less, especially since they don't test well in UX and usability testing. People don't hang around and watch these animate and absorb all the messages and do all the things. So assume people just see the first state of your panel and are gone, but let's learn how to build it because there's lots of good techniques in here, plus a super cool surprise I have coming later in the lesson. So for my dynamic panel, and let's live in the outline world, you know, as soon as I drag out a dynamic panel, I like to name it. So this is the carousel panel. And I'm going to give it 3 states, and I'm just going to put placeholder garbage in them just so that we can work a little bit more quickly. You are welcome to do the same, or if you want to build out something more realistic, you certainly can. I'm going to write a giant 1 in here, and I will make it giant with some quick and cheesy manual styling. There you go, hard to miss. And I will duplicate this. We're going to want 3 states so that we can just imagine that our carousel has 3 states. I'm going to give them different background colors. Again, we might be using global widget styles, but in this lesson, I'm going to quickly manually style things just to focus on the technique and not on the visual design. So let's have a variety of fun colors. So state 1 will be gray and say 1. State 2 is blue and it says 2. And state 3 says 3. And it is kind of that weird pea soup color I keep grabbing. All right, so that is our panel. And those are the different states that we're going to show, the different pictures that can appear in this frame. We're also going to want some icons. Of course, you can bring in images if you have icons that are images, but I usually search Axure's icons for chevrons, and I use the default chevrons. And again, you can resize them. These are pretty gigantic, or you can keep them gigantic. It's totally up to you. I'm going to put 1 on the left and 1 on the right. You can overlap your panel. They can be outside of your panel. It's completely up to you. All right, so what else do we need to set the stage for this? Obviously, we haven't built any functions yet. We're just setting that stage. So I'm going to imagine this thing also has some dots. And these dots will kind of light up or be selected true when we are seeing kind of, if it's state 1, dot 1 will look lit up. If it's state 2, dot 2, etc. I'm going to make these 15 by 15, but of course you can do whatever you like. I will do a quick copy and paste so that there are 3 of them. And let's see, let's move these around a little bit, and I can of course grab all 3 of them and use my aligning to quickly line them up and my horizontal distribution. And then you'll probably want to center these, or they could be left justified, or they could be on top of the panel, totally up to you. Remember that if you put these dots inside the panel state, then number 1, they're going to animate with the rest of the panel, so they're going to appear and disappear. And number 2, you would have to make a set of dots inside each panel with each of its functions. So it's a little bit overbuilding, but you could certainly do it if that is the look you are going for. Otherwise, I normally put these outside or I superimpose them on top of the panel. Totally up to you. Now, since we talked about these dots having a selected look and an unselected look, then we're going to want to make 2 global widget styles. Now, I'm cheating a little bit because I made this lesson before because I have to re-record this, but let's take a look at what I built, and you can build something similar. So I called these pagination dots. So I made a dot that or a style really, that has a standard line color with a border thickness of 1, so kind of what you see now. Those will be our unselected dots. And when you have a selected dot, I just made border thickness 0 and fill color wacky chartreuse pea soup. But again, we could also do line color 1. You could pick a different outline color if you want to be funky, or we could fill it in with the same color. Again, the styling is up to you. We just want to make sure that we have one style representing the selected false and one representing the selected true. Now, we've created styles, but we haven't applied the styles. So let's grab all 3 and give it the default style. Remember that the newbie mistake here is to say, well, since that first dot is going to look selected by default, because when we hit the page, we see the first carousel state, so we want the first dot to be lit up. That newbie mistake is to set the second 2 to unselected and set the first one to selected. But that's a mistake because these are currently selected false, right? They're unselected in the eyes of Axure and its selection true and false feature. If we were to say that dot 1 is pagination.selected from our global widget styles, you've just taught Axure that when this is selected false, this is what it looks like. Well, then what does it look like when it's selected true? So that is not the way to go, and again, it's a common newbie mistake. The best way to go is to always always give everything in its selected false state, the unselected visual style, and then come over here to interactions and properties and teach Axure that these have a selected style, which I can find from here, pagination.selected. So Axure is giving me a preview of what each of these would look like when we say they are selected. Now, before I click away, while I have all of these selected, can more than one of these be selected at once? No, there can be only one, which means we also want to do a show all over here in properties and give these a selection group. So I will call these pagination dots. You could call them carousel dots, totally up to you. But now we've taught Axure when one of these is selected true, make the others selected false automatically. And that way we don't have to worry about turning all of these into selected false. We just have to worry about making one of them selected true. Okay, so we've set the stage. So now let's build some of the functionality and start our baby step testing. Remember that when it comes to a carousel, let's say we've got 3 states of the carousel. When someone clicks this right chevron, they are moving forward. They expect to go from state 1 to state 2, or if they're looking at state 2, they expect to go from state 2 to state 3. Always take the time to think out what the user intention is. It's really going to help you build all of these kind of micro moments in Axure that we're just used to just working. Now we have to make them work. So that means we need to build an interaction not on the panel, but on the chevron. That's where people are clicking. So I will open up this, and let's say if people click on this, now this is about changing the panel state. We don't need to show or hide the panel. People can already see it. This is about changing the picture in the frame. So we want to set panel state of what? The carousel panel. And you might think, and this is the newbie mistake, well, it's on state 1, so people must want to go to state 2. Okay, but what if they've clicked the chevron again and they're on state 2 and they want to go to state 3? Uh-oh, how are we going to know what to do? The other newbie mistake here is to start writing a lot of conditions. If the state of the panel is 1 and people click on this, go to state 2. If the state of the panel is 2 and people click on this, go to 3. That would work, but you are overbuilding. Instead, we can just say next. And Acture will move through the states in the order in which it sees them here in the outline. So not alphabetical order, not number order. We could drag and reorder these, and Acture would go in the order of this, almost like a list. So this would be state 1, then 2, then 3. Now, if you want your carousel to stop at state 3 and not keep looping, then you're good. If you want it to go from state 1 to, if you want it to go from state 3 back to state 1, then you want to say wrap last to first. And that means that there isn't really a state at which this ends. This will kind of keep going. Now, the animation here is a little bit key, but I'm going to baby step test this and show you what it looks like if we don't have the animation, so you can get a little bit more used to what these animations look like. If we click the chevron, we will see, hopefully, that we go to the next state. State 1 goes to state 2, state 2 goes to state 3, and if we clicked wrap, state 3 goes back to state 1. That's working, but without the animation, this doesn't feel totally realistic. It feels a little bit clunky. So we can swing back, and we can add an animation. We can say, when you are changing the carousel panel to next, I want there to be a slide. Now, which direction should it slide? Some people see the right-facing chevron and they think, this must be a slide right. But if you're not sure, do what I do, and you can't see it, but I hold my hand up in the air, and I imagine there is a giant cell phone in the sky, and I imagine I am swiping to get something to move what I perceive as forward. And when you swipe something to go forward, you'll notice you start your hand, if you have a left to right language, you start your hand on the right and you swipe it to the left, and that's a forward motion. That means you actually want slide left. So we can do slide left, and we can, let's see, what else can we do with that? Not too much. Let's give it a baby step test. We'll take a look at some other options later in the lesson, but let's see how this looks. Slide. That's pretty good. That gives us that kind of choo-choo train feeling where 1 is animating out and 2 is animating in, or whatever state you happen to be looking at. Now, we can build pretty much the same thing on the left chevron, except it's obviously going to be a little bit different since the user intention here is to move backwards through this. So we can say set panel state of the carousel panel to, we don't want to pick a specific number here, we want to say previous. And we want that wrap so that state 3 will go backwards to state 1. And here we want the opposite motion. It's a slide right. So let's baby step test that. Okay, so this should be backwards. And hopefully the motion has that backwards feel to it. If the motion doesn't seem quite right, you might have picked the wrong direction slide. Try something else. So now you should have this going in this direction, and this one going in the other direction. But you're saying, uh-oh, Deb, the dots aren't lighting up. I'm going to do those later in our lesson. First, let's get some other things working, and then we'll add the dots at the end. Speaking of the dots, you probably do want it so that if you click the dot, we change the state. So we can build onto each dot. If somebody clicks on this, set the panel state. Now, we do want the carousel panel. In this case, we do want to pick the specific state. This isn't a next or previous because we want the state to exactly match the dot that they've pressed. So in this case, if they press dot 1 or click or tap, it's going to go to state 1, and I like to use a fade so that there is an animation, but I don't know if they're on a state that is before or after this, so I don't know what direction to animate in, and I find it's just not worth to build it out that far, even though we could build Axure to do that. So I'm going to build that. Clicking on dot 1 brings us to state 1 with a fade. And you can copy paste that to the other dots, or we can build each one from scratch just for practice. So dot 2, set panel state, carousel panel, state 2, fade, okay, and of course dot 3. And then we will baby step test all 3. Now, of course, the dots still won't light up. We haven't built anything that does that. That will be our next step of our lesson. State 3 and fade. All right, save and refresh. Okay, so I'm on 1, 2, 3, 1. Okay, that's looking pretty good. That works, and the animation works for me, though you can decide how you want to do it. Now let's get those dots matching up with the panel. There are a bunch of different ways to do these dots. When we see Axure's default widget for this, we'll see another way to do the dots. They do it differently than I do. I like to take shortcuts and build efficiently in Axure where I can. And I like to use domino effects and things that I can make Axure do for me. So here, I like to imagine myself thinking, hey Axure, can you take a look at which state of the panel is the one that is visible? So which is the panel state that is the picture in the frame? And then can you just match up the dot for me, please? And Axure says, yeah, I can do that. Now, first of all, let's name our dots because they're going to be part of an interaction, and so we're going to want to easily find them, and 3 identical looking circles are going to be really hard to tell apart when we go to write those interactions. If you started trying to write your interaction and you can't tell which dot is dot 1, come on back and give these a name. So I'll give this dot 1, and by the way, I'm also going to select it by default down here in Shape Properties because dot 1 is selected by default because when we first hit the page, we are seeing that first carousel state. Dot 2, I will of course name dot 2, and dot 3, I will name dot 3. And if you thought of this already and you gave them a name, that's fine too. But now we want to say, hey Axure, can you check what state the panel is, and can you light up or set selected true a dot to match? Now again, lots of ways to do this. You could even use a listener, which I teach way later in the Core Skills course. But just for fun, let's learn about building this on the panel. And if you click on the panel and you come over to build an interaction on the panel, don't rush to say click or tap. That's actually not what we want here. Erase it if you put that in here. It's not about did people click on the panel. It's about, hey Axure, did the state of the panel change? If the state of the panel changed, then I want you to check something for me. If people are looking at state 1, light up dot 1. If people are looking at state 2, light up dot 2. Now, when you hear me say if, or you hear yourself thinking if, you know we want conditions. So this means we're going to write 3 cases, each with its own condition, so that each has its own action. Now, the action is simple. It's going to be set selected of a particular dot to true, but we don't want Axure to always set dot 1 to true just because the panel state changed. It might have changed from 1 to 2. Now we need to give it a condition. So if state 1, now what does that condition look like? Axure takes a guess. If the state of this panel is state 1. Well, is this the right thing for us? Because sometimes this isn't. Let's take a look. Okay, we're working on the panel, so this would be the panel. Yes, this condition is actually correct. If the state of this panel is state 1, then set selected dot one to true. But there's other possibilities here. Let's add a case. What if people are looking at state 2? Acture takes another guess at the condition. It's close, but it's wrong. It's not if the state of the panel is 1. This time we want to check if people are looking at state 2. And remember to put your action, set selected of dot 2 to true. But we need another case. Come back up here, add case. What if it is state 3? Because we are looking at state 3, so we need dot 3. If state of this panel is state 3, what do I do? Dot 3. Now, let's just take a moment and look at this. We have 3 cases, and it might be your first time dealing with one event that can trigger 3 cases. And what we're saying to Acture is when the panel state changes, check if this is state 1. If it is, set dot 1 to truly selected. And if Acture does that, it's going to stop and not try to run these other cases because, hey, I did this first thing. These were or else's. I don't need the or else. I did this. And then we've got or else. If it's state 2, do this. If Acture can meet that condition, it will stop and not try to run this condition. And if this condition isn't true, it's not state 1 and it's not state 2, then we're going to do state 3. We're going to practice later, but just so you know, if these are kind of disconnected from each other and these are just multiple cases and you want Acture to try running all of them, you don't want Acture to stop once it's run one of them, the secret sauce there is to come into one of these else's, context menu, click on it, and say toggle if or else if. Now, instead of saying, yeah, I'm going to run this case, or else I'm going to run this case. Instead of it being I'm going to do this or else I'm going to do this, now it's I'm going to try to run this. If the condition is met, I'll do this. I'm going to try to run this. If the condition is met, I'll do this. And you know what? I'll try to run this, and if the condition is met, I'll do this. In this particular case, it doesn't make any difference because these are not exactly binary since there's 3 choices, but only one of these can be true. But where you get into more intermediate and advanced prototyping and you start having more actions and more cases on an event that don't rely on each other and they're not do this or that, you want to know about toggle if and else if. So let's give this a test. It's not so much of a baby step anymore. But if we change the state, no matter how we change it, whether we click on it or whether we use our chevrons, we should see the dot matching up with the state, and it's working. Now, some people see this and they say, Deb, that dot seems to be lagging. It seems to be slow. I think the dot should change the moment I hit this chevron and not half a second later. Well, the first question is, did you figure out why there is that lag? What's happening in Acture that's making that lag happen? Again, in learning to think like Acture, let's think this through. I clicked this. Acture changed from one state to another, but there was an animation. The animation took 500 milliseconds, which is a half a second. And then at that point, Acture goes, oh, the panel state changed. There was this other thing you wanted me to do. You wanted me to do something with the dots. And that's where we see that half of a second lag. Now, this drives some people crazy, and they want to rebuild this so that the dot changing is much more immediate. You can do that if you want, but chances are you're not usability testing how people feel about how fast that dot changes color. So in my world, for the purposes of prototyping, this is good enough, and I don't want to overbuild it. I can always write a note to developers and say the dot changes as soon as people click to change the state. But for the purposes of prototyping, this is probably just fine. Let's look at a couple of other things that we can make this do before we compare it to the default one that Acture gives us. First of all, people love to ask me, hey Deb, what if when this page loads up, this carousel just starts looping? It just starts going on its own, and whether or not people are clicking things to change the state. We can definitely do that. Some people will build it on the panel itself. Hey, Axure, this panel loaded up. Let's start changing the states. As I keep mentioning throughout our time together, when I have something that happens because the page loaded, if I put it on a particular widget, it might be hard later for your future self or a coworker to figure out where you built that. Where I see something is happening, but where the heck did this person build that? And they're going to start clicking on a bunch of widgets and have to play hide and go seek. For me, anything that tends to happen because the page loaded, I tend to build at the page level. So I've clicked away from the widget onto the page canvas, and I have page interactions, and I can say, Axure, there's something I need you to do because the page loaded. I want you to change the panel state of the carousel panel to whatever is next with that wrap, with our super slides. And you know what? I want you to keep doing this on your own. If we don't choose this repeat, it will change 1 to 2 and it will stop. Now, every 1 second is going to be really fast and super annoying. You probably want these here longer than you think. Some people pick 3 seconds. I think that that is going to be too short if you have words, if you have a button people can click, if you have a marketing message. The 3 seconds is going to be too short for people to read it, think about it, and decide whether or not they want to click the button. You might be looking at 7 seconds or even more. But just for the purposes of our time together, I'll give it 3 seconds, which is 3,000 milliseconds. Now, let's take a look at how that works and do a little test. So refresh. Every 3 seconds, I should see this change to the next thing, even though I am not clicking anything. My mouse is just sitting there. My hands are in the air. I am waving at you with both hands. This is running on its own. Now, if you've worked in UX a while, you know that this is a pretty common paradigm. Marketing loves it. We in UX typically don't like it. And it can be hit and miss with our customers. But one thing that customers and users really don't like is the carousel that never stops looping. It's so distracting. So if you do have an auto-looping carousel, do yourself a favor and give it some sort of stopping point. Now, if we've taught Axure to keep looping this forever, how are we going to tell Axure to stop looping this? Here's how I do that. I go back into my page loaded interaction and I basically write a set of steps or kind of like a mini program for Axure. Hey, Axure, start looping this. Let's imagine we want it to go through all three things twice and then stop. So how many of 3,000 seconds would that be? Is it 6? Is this 18 seconds long? Let's give it a try and see if it works. And if not, we'll talk about why not. And if so, cool. So I'm going to say wait, which tells Axure to basically, oh, sorry, I'm clicking on it. Axure wants me to click here first. That seems like a bug to me. Let's say wait for 18,000 seconds. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to see nothing happen for 8 seconds. It means Axure is going to let this run and not do anything else until after 18 seconds have passed. Then I can come back into set panel state of the carousel panel, and lucky us, we've got stop repeating as a choice. And of course, we don't need an animation. We're just trying to stop some looping and repeating that we started. So let's give this a test and see if this should stop after the second instance of state 3 without looping back to state 1. So let's give this 18 seconds and let's see if this gives us the effect that we desired. We're going to cycle through again, 1, and then 2, and then hopefully stop at 3, but let's see. Does it go again? All right. So that math worked, and you might have to play with your math a little bit based on what you're doing with your numbers, but at least now we have a carousel that doesn't loop forever. But you might say, wait a minute, Deb, that first marketing message or first state of the panel was really the most important one. I don't think I want to stop here. I think I want to go around once more and just stop on 1. So we would just need to change this wait for 3 more seconds so that we've got, because this is changing every 3 seconds, so we would want to say 21,000 milliseconds, which sounds like a lot, but is really just 21 seconds. And again, you can test this yourself until you have the right number of seconds for that desired effect. But chances are this will now cycle through twice and then stop back on the first state of the panel so that that is your choice or image or marketing message that you're showing to the world. And there it is. And we're done with that. So a couple of more things I want to do before I call this lesson done. One of them is let's talk quickly, and this is a preview, a sneak preview of what I normally teach in my mobile app prototyping. But what if we wanted this to work on a phone or a mobile device where people are swiping this? They're not, I mean, you could put chevrons and they could tap, but very often we are not showing these chevrons or these icons in a mobile interface, and we do show the pagination dots, and people typically know the paradigm to swipe on that, though again, you could include the chevrons if you want. So how do we make this swipeable? And how do we build that interaction? So this happens on the panel. People are going to touch and swipe on the panel itself. We don't need a hotspot. We do want the panel because in the case of at least Axure 10, when I'm filming this, only panels have swipe-related events. So let's build. Let's open up this editor and go back to events and look for our gestures. And let's say people swipe to the left. And again, hold your hand in the air, put your hand to the right, swipe to the left. That's a forward motion. So if people swipe to the left, we're going to basically want to do what the left chevron does. Now we've got two choices here. We can build that. We can say, oops, it's not a show hide. We can say if people swipe to the left, set the panel state of the carousel panel to the, I'm sorry, not left chevron, this will be right chevron, to the next with a wrap and a slide left. And again, the slide should probably match the swipe, so just pay attention there. Let's do a quick baby step test of that before I show you another way, a little bit more advanced, that you could build this. So I'm going to emulate a swipe. Oh, you know what? We need to turn off this looping. Hey, stop looping. You know, because I want to practice this, let's copy paste. I'm going to build another one of these. Let's throw it over here. And for this one, I'm going to turn off the looping. So that way, when this one, the first one will loop and the second one will not. Let's double check that. And that way, if you want to see how the looping works, okay. Now, my dots are dead. Why are my dots dead? Because there can be only one across 6 dots. These are all in the same group because they got copied and pasted. So these would be pagination dots 2, or whatever you want to name them. Baby step test. All right. So this one's looping, should loop, yeah, and this one is not. So let's take a look at that swipe gesture. I'm going to emulate it on my trackpad. It takes a little while to figure out how that looks, but I think I've got it. There we go. I do that with my trackpad. You should be able to do it with a mouse. But as long as you are somewhere, anywhere on this panel and you are doing a gesture of the swipe, it should work. And we can write the same thing, of course, going in the other direction, swipe right. And just for practice, I'm going to show you the other way we could have built that. Again, it's a little more advanced. No points taken off if you do it the way that I just showed you. If people swipe right, now in this case, the swipe right is really the same thing as them clicking the left chevron. And let's say you do have the left chevron on the screen. This only works if you have the left chevron on the screen. If you have a very, very mobile interface and you have no chevrons on the screen, this will not work and you will have to use the set panel state. But if you do, here's a fun advanced thing, and it's called Fire Event, and I can find my left chevron, and it says, okay, what do you want me to pretend I've done on the left chevron? And I say, pretend you've clicked it. And so, again, this is a little bit strange. It is more advanced. You don't have to do this, just a little bit of a shortcut. So the idea here is that you would say fire event, And what am I firing? I'm pretending it's the left chevron. And what am I pretending people have done on the left chevron? Click or tap. And at that point, it will just do whatever is the click or tap interaction on that widget. Let's test it. Oh, I wonder if I have the correct chevron. Oh, let's name these because we have two identical sets of things and this is going to go bad quickly. Left chevron, because if I pick the other one, I'm going to animate the wrong panel. See, this is where naming things will definitely save you from a mistake. And let's take a look at what we built. I got lucky here. I picked the correct ones. So here we go. Let's give it a try. Refresh. Swipe. Swipe. And we can see this in action in our console and our trace. And I can do that swipe. Now the other one is going crazy because every time the panel state changes, it loops again and sets the dot. So it's a little hard to keep an eye on what we just did, but we did, oh good, it finally stopped the looping. Click or tap left chevron. Let's do it again so it's at the top of our trace. So we got left chevron and that fired the event. And so we fired the event which made the left chevron fire, which made the dot change. So remember, the trace works bottom to top. So again, let's do it again and watch the trace. So that was, I swiped right. That said fire this event. So I went to fire this event. We pretended you clicked or tapped on the left chevron, and then we had to make the dots match. So that's a little bit more advanced look at fire event, which we're not really going to use in the rest of core skills. That's something I tend to teach in the advanced course. But there's one more thing that I want to show here before we're done, and that is how does what we built compare to the default carousel that Axure offers you here in the UI Patterns library. Let's drag it out and take a look at what Axure has. Now remember, it's only through learning to build our own carousel that we're going to be able to make sense of what Axure has done. So it's still good to learn to build it from scratch, because even if you want to use Axures, you're going to want to know how to manipulate it. Now, as usual, I dragged it out and Axure made it a group. And I look at this and I say, why is it a group? I'm going to ungroup it. I'm a serial ungrouper. All right, so let's take a look at what elements they have. They have the left and right chevron shapes, which is fine. They've picked a different icon or made it a different size. That's totally fine. And look at what they've written on here. Select, so set panel state to previous, wrap, slide right, and they named their panel items. So this is the items panel, and we've got, so looking back here, but then they have another panel. To look at this, set panel state items and set panel state indicator dots. So while we did our dots as 3 individual things, they've done their dots in a panel. Now, what's the pros and cons? Why do that? Let's take a look. Let's isolate what's in the panel and take a look at what Axure did. So what they've done is when you are looking at state 1 of the panel, the content panel, you're going to be looking at state 1 of the dots panel. This is not really great visual design. This difference is a little bit too subtle, but hypothetically, this would look like the selected dot, and then when we go to state 2, this also changes, and this looks like the selected dot. Now the downside here, and first of all, these are grouped, and I don't know why. It makes me want to ungroup them. Ungroup! So these would not be clickable. Notice if I go to click on this dot, or maybe I want to switch to state 3 and I want to click on this dot, there is no interaction here. And so I would have to go in and build dot 1, dot 2, dot 3, click interactions 9 times, or a lot of copy paste, because they have all of these dots and none of these dots are clickable. We would not be able to click on this to go to another panel. So that's a difference in some of the function that we built versus the function in Axure. For Axure, these dots are just for show. For us, these dots also do something, which I think is a better way to go. And they've also got, of course, their right chevron, same type of thing. But notice every time you are clicking on this, they are saying just show the next state of the dots panel. Now, what's going on inside this panel? This is their items panel, and what they've done is they have made just a wider panel with more content in it. They're imagining this might be some sort of e-commerce carousel, like you might also like these items. Picture, title, description, some sort of call to action button like see more or add to cart. So state 1 has items 1, 2, 3. State 2 has 4, 5, 6, and state 3 has 7, 8, 9. So if we wanted to baby step test Axure's carousel, we can say go to the right, and it shows each state. So it does function, and the dots do change, but I feel like we're missing a little something here. And also, let's go back into these dots for a moment, because there's another point I want to make. We used global widget styles, and here they've just done manual styling. How do I know? There's a star here after ellipse that tells me these have been manually styled. So this is an ellipse, and it's got border 0 and this fill color. And then this is another ellipse with border 0 and this fill color. So we don't even have the global styles. If somebody decided later to change the colors of these dots, you would have to go into all 9 dots and change that in every carousel you have in your prototype. So again, not my favorite thing in the world. Now, what about if people are interacting with the panel itself? Axure also did the swipe left and the swipe right, and they did the fire event. So we learned fire event over here, and over here we didn't do fire event. We just wrote out the interaction that we wanted to see. So again, to me, that's a little bit more intermediate towards advanced. If it's something that's comfortable for you, it's a technique you're absolutely welcome to use, even if you're a beginner. If it made sense to you, use it. If it was a little bit weird, you can certainly keep building in this other way, and no points taken off. So ultimately, in my opinion, I probably wouldn't necessarily use Axure's library widget for the carousel, because to me, there's too many things that I would want to undo and change about this to make it work the way I wanted. I would have to really undo a lot of what's going on with the dots and their styling and their function. And then at that point, I'm not sure we've saved time over having just built this one ourselves. And again, especially if you start creating your own library of stuff, or you're copying and pasting your stuff, reusing your own stuff is probably faster than this Axure widget, especially if you don't love their widgets. So on that note, I think that ends our carousel lesson, and let's move on, and I'll see you in the next lesson.